Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on the program. I am Abosedi Adeno Aderemi. You can join the conversation now on X, formerly Twitter, using the hashtag Beyond100Days and tag at TVC News NG. In the midst of the ongoing UN climate talks, the president of COP28, Sultan Al-Jaber, is countering allegations challenging his stance on climate science. This follows his earlier statement asserting there was no science supporting the necessity of ending fossil fuels to limit the temperature rise to 1.4 degrees Celsius. All nations at the 2015 UN climate talks collectively committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, striving to keep the global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. However, during a virtual event on the 21st of November, with Mary Robinson, the chair of the Elders Group and a former UN Special Envoy for Climate Change, Mr. Jaber seemingly contradicted his agreement.
I honestly think that there is some confusion out there, and misrepresentation and misinterpretation. And yes, I respect the science in everything I do. The science says that we must get to net zero emissions by 2050, and we must reduce emissions by 43% by 2030. And I have been very clear that my job in this mission is to ensure that my North Star continues to be, and that we stay laser focused on our North Star, and that is keeping 1.5 within reach. I have said over and over that the phase down and the phase out of fossil fuel is inevitable. In fact, it is essential. And this transition is, in fact, essential. And it needs to be orderly, fair, just, and responsible.
The discussions at the UN talks are centered around the crucial question of how and when the world will diminish its reliance on oil, coal, and gas. And for President Bola Tinubu, Nigeria is taking a significant step towards a sustainable and eco-friendly future, and that's by introducing a pioneering initiative to deploy a fleet of 100 electric buses. The president spoke at a high-level meeting with stakeholders and investors on the Nigeria carbon market and electric buses rollout program on Saturday in Dubai, the United Arab Emirates, and that on the margins of the COP28 climate summit. The president explains that the strategic initiative of Nigeria is aimed at significantly reducing the country's carbon footprint and modernizing the country's transportation systems as part of a larger effort to position Nigeria and Africa as a pioneering frontier of green manufacturing and industrialization, with a focus on natural gas as a transition fuel alongside other renewable energy sources. And to spearhead this transformative plan, the president announced the appointment of the executive chairman of the Federal Inland Revenue Service, Zak Adedeji, and Director General of the National Council on Climate Change, Dahiru Salisu, to co-chair the Nigeria Carbon Market Activation Plan. And the president said, quote, "This initiative stands as a testament to our dedication to environmental stewardship, as clearly exemplified through our collaboration with the Africa Carbon Market Initiative. Our visionary plan is a strategic guidepost directing Nigeria towards becoming an investment-friendly destination for carbon market investments," end quote. Well, let's talk some more about this. And joining us for more on that conversation is environmental rights activist Nimo Bassey. Thank you for joining us on the program. Let's begin with this issue of climate science. We have the COP president having to actually counter allegations challenging his stance on the issue. What do you make of it? Is there really some kind of science to talk about the need for the world to reduce carbon emissions to 1.5 degrees Celsius?
There's no doubt at all about the science behind the targets. What one could say is that the targets may have been too lenient because the actions we are seeing from different governments and what they're proposing to do, both governments and corporations, don't seem to appreciate the fact that that target is fast slipping away. There's been signs. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change itself is based on, runs on the basis of science. They have a big intergovernmental panel that deals with climate change science, and every year they issue a report to show the state of play of things. So the issue of our science is not in doubt. It's been very clear for some years now that the world cannot afford to extract and burn known fossil fuel reserves, because fossil fuels are known to be the major contributor to global warming. It's the major stock source of greenhouse gases that are in the atmosphere that are changing, affecting the climate and are changing everything. So the science is there. I'm not surprised that the president of the COP came out to say that he acknowledges the science. Maybe what he said before was a slip, and we have to give him the benefit of the doubt. But we've always had, when I say we, I mean observers have always had doubts about how an oil company executive would head the conference of parties, conference on climate change, and then come out very hard on the very resource that it presides over. You hear talks about phasing out or phasing down. You know, this has been a new creation that came up, especially from the COP that took place in Glasgow, COP28, when we began to hear about phasing down, coal phase down, not phase out. But right now, I think the debate about what is phasing out and what is phasing down is something that the Conference of Parties has to clarify. But phasing down appears to be a way of saying, well, one day in the future, we're going to stop depending on fossil fuel, but now we're not ready to do that now. Phasing out is much more definite. So we expect that at the end of the day, they will come out with a clear statement that according to science, if we want to have a livable future, fossil fuels have to be left in the ground.
Well, we'll look forward to that. But just before we continue the conversation, let's take this story now. It's a breaking news now coming from the federal government, and it's about the ongoing COP. We'll continue our conversation shortly. The federal government has reacted to the public conversation of the number of delegates from Nigeria attending the ongoing climate summit in Dubai, the COP28. The Minister of Information, Muhammad Idris, explained that the federal government only funded 422 delegates, as against what is reported in some media being 1,411. He says it needs to provide clarity in line with the standing pledge to conduct itself with transparency and accessibility regarding public information. He further argued that parties to this convention from Nigeria include government officials, representatives from the private sector, civil society, the voluntary sector, state governments, media, multilateral institutions, representatives of marginalized communities, and many others. The federal government reacting to post on social media, really, about the Nigerian delegation to that summit. Perhaps I should just get a reaction to that, Mr. Bassi. You know, there's been a lot said on social media. Why does Nigeria need so many people? But now the federal government has come to say that the government only sponsored 422 officially. So others are, yes, part of it, but funded privately. How do you react to that?
Well, it is good that the government has told the world how many delegates they funded. That means they funded 422 out of 1,410 that are wearing Nigeria government badges. You know, at the Conference of Parties, we have people wearing party badges, which shows we are representing the government, and others, like some of us, who are wearing observers badges, which is yellow in color. And so all the 1,410 or whatever number it is, are people who are wearing Nigerian badges. They are the official badges, either party or overflow. So it's good that we know that only a fraction of that is, or those people are being funded directly by the government. But, you know, there are many state governors and commissioners and agencies who are here that are still being funded by government. There may be some who have funded themselves, like business people who are also on that list. And so, but I do think that there are two ways to look at this problem, or this issue may not be a problem. One is clearly the number is very large. Number of people wearing Nigerian government badges at the conference is very high. Secondly, in the past, we've seen some countries who had very few delegates. And so that when debates and negotiations are going on different halls, you don't have people in those halls because there are very few. And sometimes civil society have to step in and help them with intelligence by getting information from one hall to another. So probably the Nigerian government has a large delegation because they want to be in all the negotiations at all times. So either way, I think it's a sign. It's something that government is now telling the world how many are funded by the federal government. Now, maybe later we're going to know how many are funded by various state governments and which ones are funded by agencies directly to come here. What Nigerians are really worried about is there are many things that require funds to be applied to at home. And so it's good when government comes out to clarify these issues. Thank you.
And Nigeria's participation in this conference, what do you really consider the gain for us as a country? We understand that Nigeria accounts for about 0.319% of the global carbon emissions. I mean, just how much can we actually gain, or are we gaining from this conference?
There's a lot of gain. The conference is the only space where the whole world meets to debate and discuss about what to do with climate change, the actions that need to be taken, the funding that needs to be applied for mitigation and adaptation to the challenges. And so every country needs to be there on the table. Nigeria is a significant country in the world in terms of size and everything. We have a very high population, and we have climate impacts all across the country. And so we have an interest not because we caused the problem, but because we are impacted by climate change. Those who cause the problems are very well known, the rich, industrialized, polluting countries. And our countries, Nigeria and others in Africa from the global south, have to be at the table I believe they should be driving the argument about historical responsibility and current and as well as current responsibility. Because if that was the basis, one of the bases of the formation of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change is called the Common but Differentiated Responsibilities and Respective Capacities, which means that there are some countries who are responsible and there are some who have the capacity to respond, even though they may not have caused the problem, and those who cause the problem to also have the capacity to provide the resources for tackling the problem. And so the whole world is meant to come in a cooperative manner, not in a kind of a situation where the negotiation becomes like warfare. It's meant to be an understanding. And so you need to have Nigeria on that table, and this is where we can, as a nation and as a region, get to have a fair and a balanced outcome of the discussions.
And it's good to know that Nigeria is actually represented on this table. And based on what you said earlier, having a delegation that's like perhaps we're able to, express really what our desires are as a country. But let's talk about the Nigeria Carbon Market Activation Plan. The president spoke about this, and it's one of his initiatives to actually help Nigeria attain an eco-friendly and sustainable future. Of course, he has made announcement of individuals to spearhead that program, working in partnership with the Africa Carbon Market Project also. What do you make of this effort?
Unfortunately, the conversations on climate change negotiations took a wrong turn when market mechanisms were introduced into the whole debate, into the whole negotiations. This brings a dilemma. The market created the problem. The problem is created by destructive extraction, by plantation agriculture, this industrial agriculture, and all this land use conversion driven by profit motive. And that is what created the problem. The dependence on fossil fuel, dependence on so many things that are destructive. This created the climate challenge problem. And now, because those who created the problem don't want to tackle the problem at source, they brought this mechanism of saying, well, we could keep on polluting and then pay for a forest or take up some part of the ocean to absorb carbon, and then we obtain carbon credits. And so this incentive to claim that certain natural resources like the forest or the water bodies or some soils that can absorb carbon have absorbed the carbon, and therefore you can pay some carbon credits and earn money. And Africa is falling into the trap of this false solution to global warming. The African carbon market is not a good idea. It's only a good idea to the sense that since the world is driving that way, let's get a piece of the cake. Let's get a piece of the action. But if you want to look at whose land is going to be taken, some African countries right now have placed up to 20% of their forests in the hands of planning to or sign agreements to place a large chunk of their land areas into the hands of private sector or some foreign governments who would pay them some money, and they say we'll make money. Now you lose sovereignty over your land because when you sell your land or forest, you could sell it in perpetuity, or you could sell for 30 years, for 20 years. For the period of that contract, you more or less lose control of that territory. And there are communities living in those areas who will be displaced. There are human rights abuses, so many abuses accompanying this kind of mechanism in Africa right now as we speak. Is this not speculation? It's happening already. And so when politicians and carbon speculators talk about African carbon market, I think we should take it with a pinch of salt, not just a pinch of salt. We should be worried that our communities are going to bear the burden of a problem they didn't create. And it will be almost like in the fossil fuel sector, where communities are beaten, polluted, while the resources fly over their heads.
But then, what do you recommend as it stands?
Now, as our nation, we have things that we can do. In fact, there are many things that could be done. Number one is when Nigeria goes to negotiations of this nature, they should clearly say, look, we reject false climate solutions. We don't accept carbon markets. We don't accept geoengineering. We want a payment, recognition and payment of climate debt. We are owed a debt, for goodness sake. We're owed a debt of the destructive extraction of the pollution, taking of the carbon budget within country. We are not polluting the atmosphere in a significant way, and others have done that. Those who did that should accept responsibility and put money on the table to help those who did not contribute to this problem, to tackle the problems and begin to adapt to the problem, and then also transit in a way that is fair and just, away from this destructive energy pattern.
But like you mentioned earlier, one of the strategies that Nigeria adopts, because in recent time, it's been about trying to get investment into the country. So it's just beginning to look like wherever we are able to lay our hands on it, wherever there are prospects, let's go in search of it. And if it's able to come in, we have an environment where it can actually thrive. So how do you suggest to government really to go about this? Because this looks like, okay, this fund is available. You can use it, you can maximize it to develop your economy. But now it's like this suggestion is, don't go for it because of the other risks that are associated with it.
Okay, one other thing we should recognize is the fact that even if the money were on the table, the green climate finance is not much of it is in the pot, in the account. Even the loss and damage fund that was launched, that was approved on the first day of the COP, has only about $400 million in it. 100 from United Arab Emirates, 100 million from Germany, and then smatterings from other countries in the table. So what Nigeria can do, what Nigeria needs to do, one, is to recognize the fact that those who are responsible for climate change are not really willing to put money on the table. So when we begin to debate about who would qualify for this small amount in the pot, you're going to find people telling us that only the poorest of the poor of the nations can qualify for this climate funding. And and apart from that, those who can manipulate the system, even the rich countries and their corporations who manipulate the system, when they talk about carbon market, the money that comes through that carbon market goes mostly to consultants and to the country, those who are buying up, who actually earn the credits. The communities who are suffering, who have to actually be the one to defend the carbon, so to speak, in the trees or whatever has been the earmarked as a resource, would have a trickle of the funding. So what Nigeria has to do really is to reject every form of green colonialism and call for investment in renewable energy. This is an area that will create a lot of jobs. For Nigeria need jobs. Green energy will create jobs. And this would also provide electricity to communities that are not easily accessible. So we should choose what we know is going to be beneficial to us and not accept everything that speculators put on the table to subvert the real climate action.
All right. One of the announcements that Mr. President made is that, we would focus on natural gas as a transition fuel alongside other renewable energy sources, and talking about deploying about 100 electric vehicles in the market to, of course, reduce carbon emissions. I'm wondering what your thoughts are about these steps. They might seem tiny, but then what really are your take? What is your take on these steps?
I think moving from internal combustion engines to electric engines is the pathway to the future. I foresee a situation where Nigeria should be investing more in building railways and having the means of transportation that can really convey most Nigerians. Right now, our highways are unsafe. So if we put electric buses on the highways in Nigeria, there'll be no emissions, but then it will still not meet the transport needs of the people. So I think we should invest more on the kind of mass transit that can support massive movements, as we said, and also afford us time to fix our highways because they're in pretty bad shape at the moment. So the gesture it's good to know that the government is thinking of that, but of course they have to add to that.
Indeed. And, I was just somewhere in my head thinking about, what the state of the road is, talking about Lagos vehicular traffic, really, not necessarily the state of the road. And I'm wondering, okay, how many Lagosians would that move? But then if it's a step, we hope that, there are further steps after that to make it more available to people to actually use. But I'm curious as to what your thoughts are for the average Nigerian who is out there, who probably does not understand what COP means, who needs it broken down for them, and to know how they can key into this vision of a climate resilient future.
Yes, climate change is a concept that we don't really have in many of our languages, and so sometimes, but our people can very clearly explain that they've seen that things are not the way they used to be. Rains don't come when they ought to come. Harmattan don't come when they used to come in the past. So Nigerians, people know that things are changing. But I think it's more work for us to do, both civil society and government, to really, really take these debates and arguments and conversations to the grassroots, to our communities. Because we have wisdom in the communities that are not being tapped. Nigeria has an energy transition plan. How many communities know about that plan? This is something that is going to affect people directly. And so we require to actually sit down in village squares, in town halls, and discuss the issues and find how what are the coping mechanisms and how can they benefit more. Then when these ideas are harnessed from the grassroots, you can now take these ideas to the Conference of Parties and showcase the wisdom that we have from our grassroots. And this is where we need to bring the grassroots voices onto the table at national level and at international level.
All right, so the ideas should be sourced right here locally. I must sincerely appreciate you for joining us on the program, environmental rights activist Nemo Bassi. Thank you for your time on the program.